Well, hey everybody, I'm Sam. I'm a pastor, and I've been a pastor for 22, almost 23 years now. Biblical studies student. I'm a Bible teacher. I write, and if you want to read any of my writings, you go to sambrick.org. That's my website. Click on posts, and you'll find a lot of my writings there. My training involves biblical studies, theology, biblical languages. So I was having a conversation with my dad, actually, of all people, over John 21. My dad is in his 70s now and been a Christian for most of his life. And just recently, he's gotten way more into things like biblical studies and trying to understand these passages in a deep way, which I think is super cool. You know, from someone who's been a pastor for 20 plus years and who's, you know, studying the academic study of the Bible and all this kind of stuff, I think it's super cool that he wants to know this stuff at a deeper level. And so we were having a conversation about John 21, and he was like, what do you think is going on there? Where, you know, Jesus is talking to Peter and they're having this conversation about, do you love me, and all this kind of stuff. And so I thought, that would be a great conversation to kind of, you know, for my YouTube channel to be a fly on the wall with, but I'm not going to have that conversation with my dad here so I can kind of tell you what I said and what scholars have kind of looked at over the years on what this means. And so the question that my dad actually had was a couple of them. Number one, what was going on here between Jesus and Peter, this interaction? Why is he having to restate him or whatever? And then the next question was that he had was, okay, so what does he mean that do you love me more than these? What are these? And he's reading through some commentaries. And so I want to go answer these ones first, to talk about that in John 21, and then talk about the discourse between Jesus and Peter and what's going on there. Okay, so scholars are pretty split on what it means that when Jesus says, do you love me more than these? Some scholars would say that these is reference to the other disciples, that they're kind of around, but Jesus and Peter have walked off, but he's kind of pointing back to them, kind of a deal. And the reason that they would say that is because they would point to other texts like Matthew and others that would, where Peter says to Jesus and declares to him, even though everybody else falls away, I won't. And Jesus says to him, hey, you're going to deny me 3 times. And so they would say, well, this is a callback to that moment. And Jesus going, hey, Peter, do you love me more than these, like you said? Because, you know, Peter is in this moment where he's fallen from grace. He's denied Jesus 3 times, and Jesus is now trying to reinstate him. So that's one opinion. The other opinion would be that Jesus is actually talking about fishing. He's talking about the boats, the nets, the fish, all this stuff. Because in the story, it says that Peter, it goes back to fishing. And he needs his buddies, his disciples, to go carry the nets with him and do all this stuff. And then Jesus is there, and he tells them to throw the nets on the other side. They pick up this giant load of fish, and then Peter's like, it's Jesus, and he jumps out of the boat and swims to him. And it's this idea that Peter has been called out of that life by Jesus, but he ran back to it. And so Jesus is asking him, do you love me more than these things? Are you ready to come out of this life again? And to follow me again and do what I've asked you to do. So I'm of the opinion it's the latter, not the former, because I don't think Jesus would use a shame moment there with Peter to reinstate him, to forgive him. And I don't think Jesus would bring up something he said in the past to him like that in a very shame-filled way to go, remember when you said that, kind of a deal? Like, do you really love me then? I don't think that's Jesus's MO. I don't think we see that in John, the way that John portrays Jesus. And so I think what we see Jesus asking him, hey, I called you out of this former way of life before. I'm calling you out again. Do you love me more than these? What's really fascinating about this is in the Greek. Every time for the first, Jesus asked him this question 3 times, right? And Peter answers the question 3 times. In the Greek language, the first 2 times Jesus asks, do you agape me, agapos? Do you love me that way? Peter answers him with, of course I do, I philo. And then finally, the 3rd time, Jesus says, okay, do you philein? Do you love me with philo? And Peter says, yes, I philo you. Now, some people want to read a lot into this and want to be like, oh my gosh, there's something deep and meaningful behind the fact that it's agape versus philos. And we've already talked about on my channel, like people who want to like use agape as this is God's love only. We showed how that's not true. If you go back in church history and read guys like John Chrysostom, Augustine, all that, they would tell you, if in their readings and their commentaries on the Gospel of John, they would say and these guys were Greek readers, they would say there's no distinction between, like, John's not trying to do anything here with the differences between the meanings of love here. He's just using and varying up the language. In the past, I don't want to, like, maybe 100 years or so, there have been people that have said, well, no, there is distinction here. There is deeper meaning going on here. And we need to look at that. But lately, in the past, I want to say 15 years or so, scholars have gone back the other way and said, no, these early guys, they were right. There really isn't a distinction. He's just varying up the way he uses the word love. I would split it a little differently. I think what's really going on here is, I think what the writer of the Gospel of John is trying to do here is he's trying to show that Peter and Jesus are not on the same page. There's nothing deeper in the meanings of these words. I think in using these two different words, he's showing us, look, they're not on the same page. Finally, by the third question, they're both on the same page. In fact, it's Jesus who moves towards Peter. But it's more about them being like not on the same page than being on the same page as it relates to Peter loving Jesus. And I think that's as much as we can say about that. It's kind of like, Jesus saying to him, hey, are we good? And Peter's going, yeah, we're bros. We're okay. And he's like, Jesus saying, no, are we good? And he's saying, no, we're bros. We're bros. We're good. And Jesus saying, are we bros? And he's like, yeah, we're bros. We're good. We're good. We're good. Perfect. All right, great. Now I want you to take care of the things I've asked you to do, because I know I'm asking you, do you love me more than these? Because I'm pulling you out of that life again to do this. And so I think that's what's really going on here. It's more that they weren't on the same page for a couple of the questions, because Jesus, what he's doing is he's using these three to reinstate him a forgiveness for each one of the denials that he did. So Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? And that's why by the third one, it says it upsets Peter, because I think he's realizing what's going on here, that Jesus is reinstating him step by step, denial by denial, and forgiving him each time for those. But they weren't on the same page for the first 2. And then finally on the third one, they're together and it's like, we're good, kind of a deal. So I think that's what's really going on here in the language. I don't think there's anything deeper than that, in the fact that it's agape versus philia, like, other than they're just 2 different words to show that they weren't really speaking the same in the way of each other. And then finally the third one they were. So anyway, that's my take on it. You can read a bunch of different commentaries on this. They're going to tell you a bunch of different things. It's wild to see it, because I went through like 4 just in the past, 30 minutes, and they all said 4 different things. So it's pretty fascinating to dig into this one and dive into it. So hopefully that was interesting for you. Would love your interaction on it. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.